Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining No Dumb Questions. My name is Christa of Practical Astros, and I have my Nightlight alum fellow Ryan Hunt here. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Ryan, and I have my own practice, Astrology by Ryan, and I am an alumni with Krista, and looking forward to talking to you today.
Yeah, we're going to answer as best we can, talking about the concept of Antiscia and contra Antiscia. And so I will share my screen because I made a graphic because it's a um, it's a fascinating kind of secret aspect doctrine. So it's not one that, um, with traditional aspects, we look at conjunctions and sextiles, trines, squares, oppositions. It's one that isn't looked at as often, but also still exists. So I made this graphic because as we talk about it, talk about the concept of light and shadow, it's just helpful to have something singular to look at. So it's not just abstract astro lingo. And I'll pass it over to Ryan because prior to recording, he brought up a good point of the context of which you would want to look at Antiscia. And so if you want to take it from here, and then we can start kind of describing what Antiscia actually is.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Krista. What I was mentioning was that probably the easiest way to look at the concepts of contrantitia and antitia is through the whole sign process. And that's because we're looking at the antitia and contrantitia concepts based upon the degrees within the sign. And doing so in a whole sign context makes the entire sign relevant for what we're talking about when we're dealing with the concepts of both of those contrantitia and antitia mechanisms. And you might still use quadrant houses in your practice, but just be aware that when we're talking about these two concepts, we are dealing with the degrees within both of the signs respectively.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we look at there's two solstice points in our calendar. So there's when Gemini passes the torch over to Cancer and when Sagittarius passes the torch over to Capricorn. So this is the summer solstice up here, and this is the winter solstice down here. And so the basic broad concept of what Antiscia like roughly translates to opposite shadows. And it's okay, so the sun is here, and the sun at the moment of solstice is at its highest point, at least in the northern hemisphere. The day before the summer solstice and the day after the summer solstice share antiscia with each other, meaning like they share the same amount of light, right? And you can go across these two signs, and by whole sign, like Cancer and Gemini will share antiscia with each other, but you can get down to the degree. So, like 15 degrees Gemini shares exact antiscia with 15 degrees Cancer, and then flanking that solstice point, you go backwards to Cancer or to Taurus, and Taurus shares antiscia with Leo, and then you go to Virgo. Virgo shares antiscia with Aries, and then we are at these equinox points right here where we will talk about contra Antiscia afterwards, but it continues on. So Pisces shares Antiscia with Libra, Scorpio shares Antiscia with Aquarius, Capricorn shares Antiscia with Sagittarius. We're back there at that winter solstice point. Is that roughly kind of how you would describe it to somebody?
Yeah, I would. I'd also add that when we're talking about this, I mean, it seems obvious because you have it on your screen, but when we're talking about the circle, it's the circle of the year, and each sign that we're talking about has 30 degrees in it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's important for the calculation of the Antiscia contra Antiscia point, is because we're going to be looking at 30 degrees for that calculation later on when we're talking about that.
Right. Yeah. So for example, let's say you have 0 degrees of Gemini, and it goes all the way to 29 degrees, 59 minutes of Gemini. So you have this 30-degree arc. So on the 29th degree day of Gemini, the 1 degree day of Cancer, when you add 29 and 1 together, you get 30. Those degree days, respectively, they add up to 30. That they kind of share that Antiscia. And most astrologers that use Antiscia don't really allow Antiscia to be used strongly or loudly if it goes beyond 30 degrees. Like if you have a 25-degree Gemini placement in your chart, you would look for a 5-degree Cancer placement. You wouldn't say like a 9-degree Cancer placement really has Antiscia to that 25 because it goes so beyond that. But yes, ideally you would look to see kind of how they add up. So like a 10-degree Taurus placement would share Antiscia with a 20-degree Leo. Again, they just kind of roughly have to add up to 30. The closer they are to that 30, they're on those dates, they share the same light. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
And also on the Antiscia, it's not just sharing the same light, but also the same shadow. So
Hmm.
there's that balance, right? So on the
Yep.
Antiscia, we're looking at the balance when you add up the quantity of light and the quantity of darkness in those days
Hmm.
lead to each other, they have a balance to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And so even like so in traditional astrology or Hellenistic astrology, the signs of Cancer and Gemini are in aversion to each other because they're right next door. But because they have this Antiscia with each other, it's another way of sight, even though it's not sight through a traditional aspect. William Lilly said that they kind of share on the same virtue.
Yeah.
Another concept is lichen girding, where like planets or signs have like the same domicile ruler, but they can't see each other by sight. Like Libra and Taurus can't see each other by traditional sight, but because they're both ruled by Venus, they kind of share similarities. So even
Oh, sorry, Krista. I had this like idea that just popped into my
yeah,
head.
yeah,
That's so relevant. So I'm just moving location. I'm going to be moving in next to my partner, and her son's like, "Oh, does that mean we're going to put a string up and tin cans between our
yeah,
houses, right?" And that's kind of what we're talking about. Even though you
yeah,
can't next door to each other, you can't like see each other through the walls, but you might have that string and tin can going between each of the planets in,
yeah.
yeah.
Which kind of goes into like, okay, well, how would you use Antiscia? Like, okay, so 4 degrees Gemini shares Antiscia with 26 degrees Cancer. Like, so what?
Right.
I have my uses, but I'm curious to see like, how do you, when, if you see Antiscia in a chart,
Yeah.
how does it get your attention and why does it get your attention?
Yeah, I think, for me, Antiscia is most relevant, like you were saying, when the signs are in aversion, because then you have something that you've got a real way of communication that's not otherwise there.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's relevant in all contexts, but really when it's in aversion, you've got a strong moment there where you're able to say, okay, this planet. So let's say if you had Mercury in domicile in Gemini and Moon in domicile in Cancer, right? And they normally wouldn't be able to see each other or witness each other by whole sign. But if they're in an Antiscia with each other, that is almost the same to me as like a reception, like a mutual reception, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Even though they're in their own signs, the fact that they're able to talk, they're able to exchange resources, exchange messages. So depending upon where those houses fell in, I mean, where those signs fell in a person's house, that might be talking about something. So let's say Gemini was in, let's take those houses right there, 10 and Moon is in 9. That might have something to say that those two planets are able to support each other in the topics of philosophy, travel, study, religion versus their career. So that might be something where somebody becomes like a priest and their career is in religion, or they
Mm-hmm.
end up, able to travel overseas for their career, where those things might not otherwise naturally be signified, but because of the anticia between them, we can see that those significations are coming up.
Yeah. Yeah, so a lot of astrologers look at Antiscia similar to kind of how conjunctions work. It's like this merging of significations. And others have looked at a supportive nature of Antiscia as being a sextile or a trine. I've read more that it's more like a conjunction than it is any other aspect, even though conjunction isn't traditionally considered an aspect because it's merged. Um, aspect means to see or to bear witness, and if you're fully merged, it's hard to like be to witness what you are. But if I see Antiscia happening, it's one of these things that always pops out of a chart for me. If I see it, my eyes just go right there, and it usually gets my attention of a tiny little flag to say there's something hidden that wants to be revealed that's actually a really important key. And Antiscia and contra Antiscia were used for a long time just as strongly as other aspects were, but they're not as commonplace now, but they still exist, right? And so when I see an Antiscia or contra Antiscia, I look to what sort of insight is trying to come up to the surface. It's like these little secret keys or these little intuitive keys that the nativity or the chart of the moment is trying to see the light and say, like, I'm here to help, and I might have something that you would not expect or have something unconventional. When I look at chart of the moments and I see 0 Antiscia, I kind of get this idea of like everything's just going to be on the surface, and there's not these undercurrents that are happening that are trying to be influential behind the scenes, or the mycelium of mushrooms. It's like everything's on the level. But if there are Antiscia or contra Antiscia, it gets my attention of I am Scorpio rising, so I am immediately the detective and suspicious that there's something going on behind the scenes, because there usually is. But
Usually.
Antiscia is kind of like, look over here, look around this corner. Like, what is this Antiscia point? And I've used it with clients of they're trying to understand a placement in their chart, and you go through all the traditional ways of what's the ruler, where's the house, what aspects that it makes, nothing really hits. You
Mhm.
find the Antiscia point of that placement to seek, I need some help. Like, what am I not seeing? And I think that's the best thing for Antiscia is like, it may not seem obvious, but here's a place in the chart that you can also look to glean insight. And that's kind of traditionally how I would use it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's also important to recognize like when a planet is moving towards that Antiscia point or moving away from that Antiscia point, because that might also lead into that. It's kind of like moving into the conjunction or moving away from the conjunction.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, it's not conjunction is not like a true aspect, but just like when the moon is moving into the cazimi, any planet is moving into cazimi with the sun, there's a different feeling of that planet moving into alignment than it is when they're moving away from the alignment. And
Definitely. Yeah.
also something we can look at when we're looking at these different points.
Yeah. So let's now turn the tables and look at the contra Antiscia, because contra Antiscia is more like an opposition. And, I know that like with aspects like the sextiles, the nature of Venus, the trines, the nature of Jupiter, squares are the nature of Mars, opposition is the nature of Saturn. I've often wondered, like, well, what's the conjunction the nature of? And I feel like it's the sun. The sun feels like, when things cazimi or merge with the sun, all of the planets orbit around our star. So the conjunction, the merging feels like the sun. I'm also not convinced that it's not Mercury, but Mercury just likes to insert himself to be trickstery anyway. But for contra Antiscia, it does feel very Saturnine that like there is a tension point, there is a furtherance of, there is an oppositional defiant nature, and contra Antiscia can sometimes signal kind of like a secret opposition or like a hidden opposition. And so starting on the equinox points, the last 10 days of Pisces have a different quality of light than the first 10 days of Aries, because light is slowly growing, but it has not overtaken yet like it has in Aries. So there is a different type of relationship. And because from Aries to Virgo, there's more planetary day hours than there are when it's Libra to Pisces. They're actually equal. There's the amount of planetary day hours as there are lunar night hours on the kind of the lunar side of the year. And so these signs from Aries to Virgo are considered commanding signs, or like the 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 commanding, the solar, the put upon, like exerting the energy of the planet, like the applying aspect, versus the receptive lunar, it's receiving or hearing or obeying the command that these signs send to this. So there's a different relationship. It's not just equal. It's a more of an applying, receiving sort of an aspect, which can feel oppositional. So what's your thoughts on contra Antiscia and how it's used?
Well, first, I wanted to mention that just like in the Antiscia, where we have the same balance of the same amount of light and the same amount of night in those, when we're talking about the contra Antiscia, the balance is kind of flipped in the fact that there's if you were to add up the amount of day and night between the 2 days, say 48 hours, it actually works out where there's the balance moves to where there's the equilibrium is, how to say this, it's like if you were to take a snow globe or something like that that's filled and you're moving it, like if there's 48 hours total in the contra Antiscia, you might end up with more light or more dark overall because the balance is shifting. So there's kind of like the light can seem like it's overweighing the dark, and the dark can feel like it's overweighing the light at different points. And that's that tension that you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that like when we're talking about like that and seeing how the Saturnine quality is coming into place, it the Saturn opposition, when we look at the Saturn as being the ruler of the opposition from a thema mundi standpoint, it rests opposite to the moon and opposite to the sun, and so it has that sense of really bringing out the tension between all of the points that are involved. And so that contra Antiscia does have this sense of like, it's the secret, you know, like they talk about the hidden enemy, sometimes 12th house is that it's the secret that you don't know about, that you can't quite figure out what it is.
Yeah.
It's giving you some kind of oppression or holding you back or preventing you from moving forward in a certain direction, which is not always a bad thing, but it is kind of like, what is this thing that's holding me back? And we look at it, we can't see it anywhere else in the chart. Sometimes it does pop out that those planets are in contra Antiscia, and
Yeah.
they actually are like one is creating an antagonism for the other.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, there's the planetary joy. So different planets find themselves most at home in a house in the chart. And Saturn finds her joy in the 12th house, which is called the house of hidden enemies. That's a great observation. I think that's a way to totally utilize it, a feeling like there's something that I'm pushing up against this invisible wall, or something is holding me back, something is causing delay, all these Saturnine things. Where is it? And if you can calculate or find an astrologer to help you calculate, their AstroSeek website, astro-seek.com, has a free Antiscia, contra Antiscia calculator. So you can put in your own birth data and see all the Antiscia and contra Antiscia points of your own natal chart. To help you interpret it, I would encourage you hiring an astrologer, because we literally go to school for life for this. So we love to look at this kind of thing. But if there is an area of life where you feel like I'm doing everything I possibly can and still I'm not getting the momentum that I feel like I really should, looking at the contra Antiscia point, I think is excellent. And so this graphic here has arrows going in different directions. And just really quickly, to not scramble your brain any more than we already have, if you look at how we've talked about Gemini and Cancer enough, let's look at Aquarius and Scorpio. So Scorpio and Aquarius share Antiscia with each other. Now, if we look at where they share contra Antiscia, the fixed signs really love to just stay fixed with each other, because we only share Antiscia and contra Antiscia with fixed. So Leo here and Scorpio here are contra Antiscia to each other. Scorpio and Aquarius are Antiscia to each other. Aquarius and Leo are opposite. So this is kind of a trick. If you can't conceptualize what's Antiscia, what's contra Antiscia, and again, thinking of it in a whole sign system, is the place to really start, so you can kind of somewhat grasp it. The signs that are opposite of the Antiscia are the contra Antiscia to that same sign. So Scorpio, Antiscia to Aquarius. The opposite of Aquarius is Leo, which is contra Antiscia to Scorpio. Libra the same. So Libra is has Antiscia with Pisces. The opposite of Pisces is Virgo. Virgo and Libra share contra Antiscia. So it's like they are kind of connected in that way. The opposing sign kind of is that kind of secret key. It's almost like Yod in modern astrology. It's like these are the connecting pieces here. So we haven't talked about, or we've talked about the literal form of light. We haven't gone too much into, well, what is it in kind of a human, soul interpretation with a few minutes. Do you want to go into like just what your personal theories are on like the use of light and shadow, using the theory or the aspect doctrine of contra Antiscia and Antiscia, of how you might look at it within your own nativity or with a client? Tiny question.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
We could go down a deep rabbit hole with that. Let me think how I might summarize that quickly. Yeah, I think when we're talking about the daylight versus night, and that's a tangible, measurable thing, right? So when we're dealing with, like we talked about, when we're dealing with Antiscia, it's the same amount of daylight and the same amount of nighttime. So there's a balance there. When we're dealing with contra Antiscia, the balance is that there could be the same amount of day as there is in night. So like in the contra Antiscia, if there's, let's say, 2 hours of day, then the other side might have 2 hours of night. So it's whatever amount of day, that's how much night there is in the contra Antiscia. And in the Antiscia is how much they both have the same amount of day and they both have the same amount of night. And if we take the concept of day and night and kind of move it past just the physical measurements, and what does that mean for our lives and being human, and the concept of light and shadow, when I'm thinking about myself and within myself, the light and shadow that I have within me, like everybody has light and shadow within them, and moving through that kind of philosophically, I think of like the Antiscia as being something that is maybe supporting where I'm trying to go, or supporting my aspirations, supporting my intentions, and the contra Antiscia as being, something that shows me that maybe my intentions for whatever I'm setting out to do might not be in alignment with what is in my chart or astrologically, by transit or whatever. So it's kind of like a way to say, like, my own personal light and shadow of what my mission, my purpose, my intention in life is. And Antiscia seems like, oh, we're in harmony with that. And the contra Antiscia is like, we're kind of like, maybe what I'm pushing for, my own desires in life, are pushing me beyond what I'm going to have success in based on astrologically, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like in a client, like if I were to have a client that's looking at that, we might, like, I do a lot of like career work, stuff like that. So we might look at that and say, well, maybe this contra Antiscia is showing you that that's not really what your true career calling is. What do you think about these other things? Or if it's the Antiscia, then, and somebody's like, well, I really want to do this, but I don't know whether I should. And then there's the Antiscia there, then maybe it's a confirmation that they should move forward with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen just within my own studies of contra Antiscia kind of bubbling up almost as like a kind of the base and instinctual self just kind of like bubbling out, and maybe wanting to seek some sort of harmony, but it doesn't feel like it comes out in a harmonious way. It feels like libidinal, it feels just like it just kind of exerts itself, and it could feel more difficult, like an opposition can feel. It can feel like a tension point, as opposed to Antiscia. It feels like there's like guardian angels, like kind of really positively, helping the illumination of it all. But also, what I would be curious about, and I'm sure there are astrologers who do this. I don't do synastry readings, but I would see using Antiscia and contra Antiscia with two people to see kind of where there might be discord, where there might be kind of the inability to communicate in traditional ways, and looking at the contra Antiscia points. Are they pinging something like a personal planet that is causing pain, or causing some sort of hidden tension, I feel like that those would be useful ways to just explore because we have shadow always, and sometimes shadow needs light shown on it. Sometimes shadow just needs to be left alone. So it's I think doing use in synastry would be a useful tool. I have not personally experienced that myself, but it kind of came up to just find that within two people.
That's the interesting, when I do synastry, and I actually do a lot of it for some reason, but when I do synastry, one of the big points that I use is the vertex point, which is kind of a secret descendant.
Mm.
And now that you're mentioning it, I'm going to have to go back and look at some of my synastry charts to see where the Antiscia or contra Antiscia between individuals' vertex points lies. So
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
that's cool. I'm gonna have to go back and look at that. I hadn't thought about doing that before. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
Well, did we cover it enough? Do you think that we confuse people or?
I think that we've covered it enough to give people plenty of questions to ask more.
Yeah, yeah. So with that, do you want to share some of your practice? So you do synastry readings, but what else do you do just in your astrological life?
Yeah, I mean, what's kind of come to me is synastry and astrocartography, but I do a lot of career coaching using astrology. I also help people that are doing psychedelic journey work through astrology, and then just traditional Hellenistic, straightforward natal readings and transit solar returns. So I kind of do the whole practice for all of it. And you can check out my work at ryan-hunt.com is where my website's at. And yeah, YouTube at Astrology by Ryan. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'll put all of that in the show notes. And
Great.
I can attest to Ryan's, he has such a compassionate approach to just meeting people where they're at. And I love his observations in class. We've been in class for 3 years now at this point, and have like really enjoyed just kind of witnessing your style of astrology and the vulnerability and the shares and the compassion that you express. So thank you so much for joining, and we'll call that a wrap.